To those of you listening tonight, I see you. Maybe you're sitting in a quiet house where the only sound is the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Maybe there's an empty chair across from you, one that used to belong to somebody. Maybe the telephone hasn't rung in days, and you've started talking to yourself just to hear a voice in the room. I understand. I do. I want to tell you about a woman named Maggie. She was 62 years old. A widow, living alone in the north woods of Minnesota. She'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be needed by anyone. Then one winter evening, she found something on a frozen road that changed everything. This story is for everyone who's ever felt invisible, for everyone who wonders if their useful years have passed them by, for everyone who needs to believe that sometimes when we least expect it, the good Lord sends us exactly what we need. So, settle in. Pour yourself some coffee. Let me tell you what happened. The headlights caught something white against the white snow. Maggie's foot found the brake before her mind caught up. The old Ford F-150 shuddered and groaned, tires biting into the ice. She gripped the steering wheel with both hands, knuckles going pale, eyes fixed on the shape sitting in the middle of County Road 16. A rock. Had to be a rock. Rocks don't blink. She squinted through the windshield. The wipers pushed snow aside in tired. Squeaking arcs needed replacing since last winter, but she kept forgetting. The heater rattled and wheezed, barely winning the war against the cold that seeped through the rusted door seams. The whole cab smelled of old coffee and the faint ghost of Walter's pipe tobacco, even after 3 years. The shape didn't move. Maggie sat there for a full minute, engine idling. Groceries from the Red Owl sitting in paper bags on the passenger seat, Campbell's soup, Wonder Bread. The same things she bought every Wednesday because changing the list meant admitting things had changed. The radio played low. Patsy Cline singing about falling to pieces, the way she always did on the oldies station out of Duluth. The shape still didn't move. "Well, I'll be," Maggie whispered. She put the truck in park, left the headlights burning. Her hand hesitated on the door handle, fingers stiff from the cold even inside her wool gloves. "Don't be foolish. Maggie, you're 62 years old with a bad knee. It's 14 degrees out there, probably colder with the wind. Whatever that thing is, it's none of your concern." She opened the door anyway. The cold hit her like a slap across the face. Sharp. Mean. The kind of cold that finds every gap in your clothing and crawls inside. She pulled Walter's old hunting jacket tighter, the brown canvas one he'd worn every November for 30 years. The one that still smelled like him if she buried her nose deep enough in the collar. Her boots crunched on packed snow as she stepped onto the road. The wind cut through her, whistling low and mournful through the pine trees that lined both sides of the highway. 20 feet away now, the shape took form in the headlight beams. White fur, thick and matted. 4 legs tucked beneath a lean body. A tail curled around for warmth. A wolf. Maggie stopped walking. Her heart climbed up into her throat and stayed there. Every story she'd ever heard about wolves ran through her head the Henderson calves last spring, mauled in their pen, the warnings on the radio every winter, the way Frank Dawson always kept his rifle loaded by the back door, just in case. Her own mother's voice. 50 years gone now. "You see a wolf, you run the other way. They're not dogs. Margaret, they're killers." But this wolf didn't move, didn't growl, didn't even look at her. She was looking past Maggie, down the road, toward the dark line of forest in the distance, where the headlights couldn't reach, waiting for something. Maggie took another step, then another. Her knee complained it always did in the cold, but she ignored it. 10 feet now. Close enough to see the frost crusted thick around the wolf's muzzle, turning the white fur to ice. Close enough to see the ribs showing through the coat like the slats of an old fence. Close enough to see those eyes, yellow, pale gold, like winter sunlight through bare branches. tired. So tired it hurt to look at them. And waiting. Waiting for something that wasn't coming. Maggie knew that look. She saw it every morning in her bathroom mirror. Standing at the sink Walter had installed in 1987, staring at a face that got older every year while the silence in the house got louder. "Lord, have mercy," she breathed. "Who are you looking for out here?" The wolf's ear twitched. Just once. A flicker of acknowledgement, then back to watching the empty road, the dark trees, the nothing that stretched on forever. Maggie stood in the falling snow, 14 degrees and dropping, staring at a wolf who should have run away by now, should have bared her teeth, should have done anything except sit there like a statue carved from ice and sorrow. But she didn't run. And neither did Maggie. She looked up at the sky gray and heavy with more snow coming and whispered a prayer her mother had taught her 60 years ago. "Lord, I don't know what you're asking of me here, but if this creature needs help, give me the strength to provide it." Then she walked back to the truck, reached behind the seat, found the old wool blanket folded there green and brown plaid, frayed at the edges, smelling of pine sap and gun oil and memories of Walter coming home from deer camp. Grinning, with that gap-toothed smile of his, she carried the blanket back to the wolf. "All right, girl," she said softly. "Let's get you warm. Then we'll figure out the rest together." The wolf's ear twitched again, and for the first time, those golden eyes shifted from the road to Maggie's face. Something passed between them. Something older than words. "Help me, please." Maggie knelt in the snow, bad knee and all, and began to wrap the blanket around the frozen wolf. She had no idea, in that moment, how much her life was about to change. Earlier that morning, 5:15 a.m., Maggie's eyes opened before the alarm she'd stopped setting years ago. 40 years as a school nurse will do that to a body. Some habits don't break, even when there's no reason to keep them. The bedroom was cold. The wood stove had burned down to ash and embers overnight. She lay there a moment, watching her breath fog in the gray light that crept through the frost-covered window. Walter's side of the bed was smooth, untouched. She still slept pressed against her edge, leaving room for a man who'd never roll over and steal the covers again. 3 years now, the mattress didn't remember him anymore. But she did. She swung her legs over the side. Her left knee popped like a knuckle cracking. Her lower back sang its familiar morning hymn of complaint. She ignored both and shuffled to the kitchen in her worn slippers. The ones with the hole in the left toe she kept meaning to replace. The Mr. Coffee machine sat on the counter. Same spot since Walter brought it home from the Sears in Duluth back in '87. 3 scoops of Folgers from the red can. He'd always said she made it strong enough to strip paint. She added a 4th scoop. Just because. The smell hit her as it brewed that dark, bitter perfume that meant morning, meant routine, meant another day to get through. She breathed it in deep while she waited. Oatmeal from the big Quaker canister. Plain. No brown sugar. No raisins. The way Walter used to fix it. She'd tried once. After he passed. Couldn't swallow a single bite. Tasted too much like missing him. The small TV on the counter flickered to life. Wheel of Fortune reruns. The old ones with the prizes she remembered trips to Acapulco, living room sets, grandfather clocks. She didn't watch, just needed voices filling the silence. She ate standing at the sink, looking out at the snow. The woodpile was getting low. Maybe 2 weeks left if the cold held. She'd have to call Frank, ask him to bring more. She hated asking for help. Walter never had to ask anyone for anything. 6:30 a.m. She rinsed her bowl, wiped the counter, checked the telephone on the wall. No messages, no missed calls. The calendar from Grace Lutheran hung beside the refrigerator. December, every square blank and white as the snow outside. Lord, just get me through another day. She reached for Walter's coat. The wool blanket was rough against Maggie's fingers, even through her gloves. She'd grabbed it from behind the truck seat without thinking Walter's hunting blanket, the one he'd bought at the Army surplus store in Virginia, Minnesota, back in 1972. Green and brown plaid, frayed at the edges now, still carrying the smell of pine sap and gun oil and 1,000 November mornings in the deer stand. She knelt in the snow, 10 feet from the wolf, her bad knee screaming against the cold. "Easy now," she said, keeping her voice low and steady, the same voice she'd used for 40 years with scared children in her nurse's office. "I'm not going to hurt you. You know that, don't you? If you thought I was dangerous, you'd have run by now." The wolf didn't move. Those yellow eyes stayed fixed on the dark road behind Maggie, searching the tree line for something that wasn't there. Maggie inched forward. The snow crunched beneath her knees. Cold seeped through her wool pants, through her long underwear, down to the bone, 6 feet now. The wolf's ribs showed sharp through her white coat. Each breath lifted them like piano keys beneath the fur. How long since she'd eaten days? At least, maybe longer. 4 feet. Maggie could see the ice crystals matted thick around the wolf's muzzle, could see the frost on her whiskers, turning them to tiny glass needles, could hear the shallow, rapid breathing too fast, too weak. "All right, girl." Maggie stretched out her arms, blanket spread between her hands. "I'm going to put this around you now, nice and slow. You just stay still." She moved the last 2 feet on her knees, snow soaking through to her skin. The wool touched the wolf's back, a flinch, muscles tensing beneath the fur. Maggie froze, heart pounding against her ribs. The wolf's head turned. Those golden eyes found Maggie's face for the first time, held there. Neither of them breathed. Then the wolf let out a long, slow exhale, a cloud of fog that hung between them for a moment before the wind tore it away. Her body relaxed. Her head turned back to watching the road. Permission. Maggie wrapped the blanket around the wolf's shoulders, tucking it beneath the thin body. Her hands found fur and bone through the wool. Cold, so cold it burned through her gloves. "Lord, have mercy," she whispered. "How long you been sitting out here?" "Girl." Getting her into the truck was going to be a problem. Maggie stood back, legs shaking, and assessed the situation. Her breath came in ragged puffs. Her knee throbbed with every heartbeat. The wolf was big, 80 pounds, maybe more, even starved down to bone and fur like this. Maggie weighed 135 soaking wet, and that was before her appetite went to nothing after Walter passed. She had a bad left knee from slipping on ice in '98 and a lower back that seized up if she bent wrong. She couldn't lift 80 pounds, not a chance. The truck sat 20 feet away, headlights still cutting through the falling snow, engine rumbling low. Maggie walked back to it, mind working through the problem the way it used to work through difficult cases at school, the diabetic kids, the ones with seizures, the ones nobody else knew how to help. In the truck bed, under the rusted toolbox, she found what she needed, a weathered pine board, 8 feet long, gray with age. Walter had used it as a ramp for loading deer after a hunt. She hadn't touched it in 3 years, hadn't had reason to. She dragged the board out, arms straining, and leaned it against the lowered tailgate. The angle was steep but manageable. "All right." She walked back to the wolf, legs trembling. "We're gonna do this together. You hear me? I push. You try to stand, just a little. That's all I'm asking." She crouched beside the wolf, worked her arms beneath the blanket-wrapped body, fingers digging into the frozen ground for leverage. The wolf's fur was wet where it met the snow. Ice had formed on her paws, crusting between the pads. On 3. 1, 2. Maggie heaved. Her knee screamed. Fire shot up her thigh and into her hip, hot and sharp. She gasped through clenched teeth and pushed harder. The wolf's front legs scrabbled against the packed snow. Found purchase. She got her paws under her, shaking so hard Maggie could feel it through the blanket. Good girl. That's it. Keep going. Maggie got her shoulder under the wolf's chest. The weight pressed down on her 80 pounds of bone and muscle and desperation. Her back howled in protest. She ignored it. 5 feet to the ramp. 1 step. The wolf's legs buckled. Dead weight collapsed against Maggie's side, nearly taking her down. No, 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 no. Maggie braced herself, boots sliding on ice. Come on, girl, help me out here. She heaved again. The wolf's back legs found the ground, pushed, 3 feet. Maggie's breath came in ragged gasps that burned her throat. Sweat ran down her back despite the cold, soaking into her undershirt. Her arms shook. Her knee felt like someone had driven a railroad spike through it. 2 feet. The wolf's claws caught the edge of the pine board, scratched against the wood, leaving pale grooves in the gray surface. Up. Come on now. Up. 1 step onto the ramp. The board bowed under their combined weight, creaking like an old door. 2 steps. Maggie's boot slipped on a patch of ice. She caught herself on the truck's fender, fingernails scraping rusted metal, and kept pushing. 3 steps. The wolf's body slid onto the truck bed, collapsed onto the blanket in a heap of white fur and labored breathing. Maggie fell against the wheel well, chest heaving, her lungs burned with every breath. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her temples. The sweat on her back was already turning cold, freezing against her skin. But the wolf was in the truck, alive, safe. Okay. The word came out as a wheeze. Okay, we did it. She closed the tailgate. Her hands shook so badly she missed the latch twice before it caught. The drive home took 40 minutes. Maggie kept the speed under 20, watching for ice, checking the rearview mirror every few seconds. The wolf lay visible in the red glow of the taillights. She hadn't moved from where she'd fallen, but her eyes were open, alert, fixed on the road unspooling behind them, watching the darkness swallow the place where she'd waited. What are you looking for back there? The question sat heavy in Maggie's chest as she turned onto the gravel drive that led to her cabin. The headlights swept across the front porch, the dark windows, the woodpile covered in snow, home, such as it was. She parked close to the door and sat there a moment, hands still gripping the wheel. Her whole body ached. Her knee had gone from screaming to a dull, throbbing numbness that worried her more than the pain had. What in the world am I doing? She was 62 years old. She lived alone. She had bad knees, a bad back, and a refrigerator full of soup cans she barely touched. And now she had an 80-pound wolf in the back of Walter's truck. Frank would say she'd lost her mind. Sheriff Cooper would say worse. Her son David, if he ever bothered to call, would probably drive up from Chicago just to put her in a home. Maggie looked in the rearview mirror. The wolf was looking back at her, those yellow eyes catching the red glow of the brake lights. Steady, calm, unafraid. She trusts me. The thought came unbidden. Foolish. Wolves didn't trust people. Wolves ran from people. Everything Maggie knew about wolves said this creature should have bitten her hand off by now, but those eyes held hers in the mirror. Patient. Waiting. She trusts me. Why, Maggie turned off the engine. The silence pressed in, heavy and complete. She opened the door and stepped into the cold. Whatever came next, she'd face it the way she'd faced everything since Walter died, 1 step at a time, with the Lord's help and her own stubborn will. But as she lowered the tailgate and looked at the wolf lying there in the darkness, a different question surfaced, one she wasn't sure she wanted answered. If she's been waiting on that road for her family, where are they now, and what happened to them? The cabin was dark and cold when Maggie got the wolf inside. Getting her down from the truck bed had been easier than getting her up. Gravity helped, and the wolf seemed to understand what was happening. Maggie half carried, half slid her across the porch, through the front door, leaving a trail of melting snow and wet fur across the wooden floorboards Walter had laid himself back in '75. She made a bed by the wood stove. Old quilts from the cedar chest in the bedroom, her mother's quilts, the ones with the wedding ring pattern, stitched by hand in 1952. They hadn't been used in years, smelled of cedar and mothballs and time. The fire had burned down to nothing. Maggie fed it kindling first newspaper, dry twigs, the small pieces Walter always kept in the brass bucket by the hearth, then larger logs, one at a time, until flames licked up and heat began to push back against the cold. Her hands shook the whole time, from exhaustion, from cold, from something else she couldn't name. "Stay there," she told the wolf. "I'll get you some water." She filled a bowl from the kitchen tap, Walter's old camping bowl, dented aluminum with a faded enamel coating, the one he'd carried on every fishing trip to Lake Vermilion since before David was born. She set it in front of the wolf's muzzle. The wolf's nose twitched. She lifted her head barely, just an inch, and her tongue found the water. Slow, weak laps, like she'd forgotten how to drink. She finished half the bowl, then collapsed. Maggie lowered herself to the floor beside her. Her knee screamed, her back joined in. She ignored them both and settled against the base of the couch, close enough to touch the wolf, but not quite touching. The wood stove crackled and popped. Heat began to fill the room, pushing the cold back into the corners. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows in their old frames the way it always did during a storm. The wolf's breathing slowed, steadied. Her eyes stayed open, watching the door. But the frantic edge had gone out of them. "You're safe now," Maggie said softly. "Whatever you were looking for out there, it can wait until morning." The wolf's ear turned toward her voice. Nothing else moved. Maggie didn't mean to stay on the floor all night, but every time she thought about getting up, about going to bed in the cold bedroom at the end of the hall, something held her there. The sound of the wolf breathing, the warmth radiating from her body, the simple fact of another living creature in the house. Midnight came and went. The fire burned low. Maggie added more wood, moving slow to avoid startling the wolf, then settled back against the couch. 2 a.m. The wolf's breathing changed. Slower now, deeper. The rapid, panicked rhythm from before had smoothed into something calmer. Sleep. Real sleep. Maggie reached out without thinking. Her hand found the white fur. Warm. The wolf was warm. She ran her fingers through the coat, feeling the texture coarse guard hairs on top, soft undercoat beneath. The ice had melted, leaving the fur damp but no longer frozen. Beneath her palm, she could feel the wolf's heart beating. Steady. Strong. The wolf didn't stir. Didn't flinch. Maggie's hand stayed there, resting on the wolf's side, rising and falling with each breath. "When's the last time I touched another living thing?" The question surfaced unbidden. She counted backward. David's last visit 2 years ago. Thanksgiving, and even then he'd hugged her for maybe 3 seconds before pulling away. Frank shook her hand sometimes, but that wasn't the same. The checkout girl at the Red Owl handed her change without their fingers touching. 3 years since Walter. 3 years since she'd fallen asleep with someone's heartbeat under her hand. She closed her eyes and let the tears come, quiet and hot against her cold cheeks. Sunrise crept through the windows, gray and pale. Maggie hadn't slept. She'd sat on that floor all night, hand on the wolf's fur, watching the fire and listening to the wind. Her body felt like she'd been beaten with a stick. Every joint ached, every muscle complained, but she was smiling. The wolf was still breathing, still alive, still here. Coffee. She needed coffee more than she'd ever needed anything. The Mr. Coffee machine gurgled to life. Maggie stood at the counter, watching the dark liquid drip into the pot, trying not to think about what came next. What am I going to do with a wolf? The crunch of tires on snow, her head snapped toward the window, and the green Chevy pickup was pulling into her driveway. Rust spots on the fenders, gun rack in the back window, Frank Dawson. Her stomach dropped. Frank didn't knock. He never had. Not in 30 years of being neighbors. The front door swung open, letting in a blast of cold air and the smell of wood smoke and diesel. "Maggie, you left your porch light on all night. Saw it from my place when I got up to—" He stopped. His eyes found the wolf. The wolf's eyes found him. For a long moment, nobody moved. Frank stood in the doorway, one hand still on the doorframe, mouth hanging open. He was 70 years old, built like a fence post, with a face like weathered leather and hands that could split a cord of wood before breakfast. He'd been Walter's best friend for 40 years. He'd been checking on Maggie every few days since the funeral, whether she wanted him to or not. Right now, he looked like he'd seen a ghost. "Tell me that's a dog." "It's not a dog, Frank." "Maggie." She was dying. Maggie stepped between Frank and the wolf, arms crossed over her chest. She was sitting in the middle of the road, half frozen, starving. What was I supposed to do, leave her there? Frank came inside, closed the door behind him. His jaw was working, the way it did when he was trying not to say something he'd regret. "So, you brought a wolf into your house?" "I reckon I did. A wild wolf." "She's not wild right now." Maggie kept her voice calm, the way she used to when parents got upset in her nurse's office. "She's worn out, half-starved. She's been looking for her pups." Frank's eyebrows shot up toward his receding hairline. "How in the world do you know she's got pups? Look at her." Maggie gestured toward the wolf. "She's been nursing, or she was, before she got separated from them." Frank looked. The wolf's teats were visible now, swollen beneath the thin fur of her belly. He rubbed a hand over his face, stubble rasping against his calloused palm. "Maggie, listen to me." His voice dropped, the way it did when he was trying to be patient. "Wolves kill livestock. Henderson lost 3 calves last spring to a pack just north of here. She's one wolf, Frank, not a pack. One wolf with pups somewhere. Pups grow up. Pups get hungry." He jabbed a finger toward the animal. "What happens when she gets her strength back? You think she's going to curl up by your fire like some kind of house cat? She'll take your hand off soon as look at you." The wolf's ears flattened. A low sound rumbled in her chest, not quite a growl, but close. Frank took a step back, hand moving toward the hunting knife on his belt. "See, you see that?" His voice rose. "That's what I'm talking about." "You're hollering at her. Frank." Maggie didn't move. "Course she's growling. Wouldn't you—" "I'm not the problem here. I'm not keeping her." Maggie met his eyes and held them. "I'm helping her. There's a difference." Frank stared at her. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Walter wouldn't have—" "Don't." The word came out sharp as a slap. It hung in the cold air between them. Frank's jaw tightened. "I'm just saying. I know what you're saying." Maggie's hands were shaking now, but her voice stayed level. "And I'm telling you to stop. Don't bring Walter into this. Don't tell me what he would or wouldn't have done. He's not here. I am." Silence. The wood stove crackled. The wolf's growling faded to nothing. Outside, a crow called from somewhere in the pines. Frank looked at the wolf. The wolf looked back at him. Yellow eyes steady, unblinking. No fear. No aggression now, just measuring him, deciding what he was. Something shifted in Frank's face. The anger drained out, replaced by something softer, something tired. Mildred would have done the same thing, I reckon. Maggie blinked. Frank never talked about his wife. She'd passed 5 years back, cancer, and he'd sealed that grief up tight as a mason jar. She was always bringing home strays, he said quietly. Cats, dogs, a raccoon once that bit her twice before she let it go. He shook his head. Stubborn as a mule, that woman, just like you. Maggie didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. Frank sighed, long and heavy, like he was letting go of something. You're going to do this no matter what I say. It wasn't a question. I reckon I am. He shook his head again, pulled his keys from his coat pocket. Fine. But you can't feed a wolf on Campbell's soup and whatever's gone bad in your freezer. He was already heading for the door. I've got venison in my chest freezer, deer I shot last November. I'll be back in an hour. Frank, try not to get yourself killed before I get back. The door closed behind him. Maggie stood in the silence, heart pounding. Her hands were still trembling. She pressed them flat against her thighs. The wolf was watching her. Those yellow eyes, calm now, almost curious. He's not as tough as he acts, Maggie said. Her voice came out hoarse. Known him 40 years, he'll come around. The wolf's tail moved, just once, a small wag, barely visible. Maggie stared. Did I imagine that? She crossed the room, knelt beside the wolf, ignoring her screaming knee. Those golden eyes tracked her face, patient and still. You understood all that, didn't you? Maggie whispered. Every word. The wolf's tail moved again, and somewhere in the back of Maggie's mind, between the exhaustion and the wonder. A question began to take shape, one she'd been avoiding since she first saw those eyes on the frozen road. If she's been looking for her pups all this time, where did she lose them? And are they still alive out there somewhere, waiting for their mother to come home? Day 2. The venison sat in a pile on Walter's old camping bowl. Raw, dark red, almost purple, still half frozen from Frank's chest freezer. Ice crystals glinting in the morning light. The smell of it filled the kitchen iron and cold and something wild. A smell Maggie hadn't known in 3 years. Not since the last deer Walter brought home. November of the year he died. The wolf, Maggie had started calling her ghost in her head, because of the way she moved without sound, lifted her nose toward the meat, her nostrils flared wide. A string of saliva dripped from her jaw onto the quilt. She ate slowly. Teeth tearing small pieces. Chewing careful. Like she'd forgotten how her body worked. Like she had to remind herself what food was for. Maggie sat in the wooden chair by the window, coffee cup warming her hands, watching. My husband used to hunt deer every fall, she said. Ghost's ears rotated toward her voice. She kept eating. Brought home enough to fill that freezer in the garage. Venison steaks, venison sausage, venison jerky. I used to complain about it. Tell him we'd be eating deer till kingdom come. Maggie took a sip of her coffee. It had gone lukewarm, but she didn't care. Funny thing is, I'd give just about anything to hear him come through that door with another buck over his shoulder. Ghost finished the meat, licked the bowl, licked it again, searching for anything she might have missed. My son thinks I should sell this place, move down to Chicago, get an apartment near him and his family. Maggie stared into her cup. Her reflection rippled in the dark, liquid-tired eyes. Gray hair, lines that hadn't been there 5 years ago. I told him this is my home, and he said, Mom, a home needs people in it. Ghost looked up at her. Those yellow eyes, patient and still. Know what I said back to him? The wolf's tail twitched. Not a blessed thing. Couldn't think of a good answer. Maggie set her cup down on the windowsill. Reckon maybe I still can't. By afternoon, Ghost was standing. Her legs shook like a newborn foal's. Her muscles trembled beneath her white coat. But she pushed herself up from the quilts and stood there, swaying, for a full 30 seconds before her back legs gave out. Maggie watched from the kitchen doorway, dish towel frozen in her hands. Lord have mercy. She's getting stronger. An hour later, Ghost tried again. This time, she made it to the door. She stood there, nose pressed against the gap between the door and the frame, sniffing like her life depended on it. The cold air seeped through, carrying scents Maggie couldn't begin to identify: pine sap, frozen earth, animal musk, the 1,000 invisible messages written on the winter wind. Ghost whined, low and plaintive, like a child crying for something it couldn't name. Maggie set down the dish towel, crossed the room, stood beside the wolf. They're still out there, aren't they? She said softly. Your babies. Ghost's claws scratched against the wooden floor. She pressed harder against the door, and the whine became a thin, keening sound that made something twist deep in Maggie's chest. I know, girl. Maggie's hand found Ghost's back. The fur was dry now, clean and soft, warm from the fire. I know you want to find them, but you're not strong enough yet. You go out there now. You won't make it a mile before you collapse. Ghost turned her head. Those golden eyes found Maggie's face. Please, please let me go. One more day. Maggie's voice cracked. She cleared her throat. Give yourself one more day to heal up. Then we'll figure something out. I promise you that. Ghost held her gaze. Something passed between them, an understanding that went deeper than words, deeper than the gap between human and animal. Then she turned and walked back to her bed by the fire. Slow, careful, each step an effort. She lay down, but she didn't sleep. Her eyes stayed fixed on the door. Watching. Waiting for something Maggie couldn't give her. Day 3. Morning, the crunch of tires on frozen gravel. Maggie was scrambling eggs at the stove, 2 eggs, the way she always made them, even though she'd only eat one and give the other to Ghost. The smell of butter and pepper filled the kitchen, mixing with the wood smoke from the fire. She looked out of the window. A brown and tan SUV was pulling into her driveway, the word sheriff painted on the side in gold letters. Her stomach dropped like a stone in a well. Ray Cooper stepped out of the cruiser. He adjusted his hat against the cold, looked at the cabin for a long moment, then started walking toward the porch. His boots crunched in the snow. His hand rested on his belt, not on his weapon, but close enough. Maggie met him at the door before he could knock. Morning. Ray. Maggie. He touched the brim of his hat. His breath fogged in the cold air, and his mustache gray now. Needed trimming was frosted at the tips. Got a minute. I reckon that depends on what you're here for. Ray sighed. He was 55, built like a barrel, with a face that had seen too much and eyes that had stopped being surprised by anything years ago. He'd been sheriff of St. Louis County for 12 years, knew everyone from Ely to Tower, knew their business, their troubles, their secrets. Got a call yesterday evening, he said. Someone driving on County Road 16 saw you stopped in the middle of the road, night before last. Said it looked like you were loading something into your truck. He pulled a small notebook from his coat pocket, flipped it open. Something big, something white. Maggie's grip tightened on the doorframe. The cold seeped through her sweater, raising goosebumps on her arms. Since when is stopping on a county road a crime? It's not. Ray met her eyes. His expression was careful, neutral, the face of a man who'd learned to deliver bad news without flinching. Unless what you were loading was a wolf. Silence. The wind gusted, swirling snow across the porch. From inside the cabin, Maggie heard Ghost shift on her quilts. She was dying. Ray? The words came out flat, resigned. No point in lying, he'd find out anyway. She was sitting in the middle of the road, frozen half to death. I couldn't just drive on by. Ray's jaw tightened. Can I see her? Maggie stepped aside. Ghost was lying by the wood stove, head raised, ears flat against her skull. The fur along her spine stood up in a ridge. Ray stopped 3 feet inside the cabin. His hand moved to his holster, fingers resting on the grip of his service weapon. Easy now. Maggie stepped between them, the way she had with Frank. She's not going to hurt you. She's a wolf, Maggie. She's a mother who lost her pups. Maggie kept her voice calm, steady, the way she'd talked to 1,000 frightened parents over 40 years. She's been looking for them. That's why I found her on the road. She was too exhausted to keep searching. Ray studied the wolf. Ghost studied him back, those yellow eyes unblinking. Neither of them moved. She's calm, Ray said finally. Some of the tension went out of his shoulders. She's tired, and she's scared, and she's got no idea where her babies are. Maggie crossed her arms. You're a father. Ray, put yourself in her place. Ray's mustache twitched. He looked at Ghost for a long moment, then back at Maggie. I can't pretend I didn't see this. I'm not asking you to. Wolves are protected under federal law. Maggie, there's regulations, procedures. I know the regulations. Maggie lifted her chin. I also know the county's supposed to have someone check on seniors living alone at least once a month. When's the last time anybody from your office stopped by? Ray's face reddened beneath his weathered tan. That's what I thought. Maggie softened her voice. No point in making an enemy. I'm not asking you to look the other way. Ray, I'm asking you to give me a few days. Let her get her strength back. Then she'll leave on her own. Go back to the wild where she belongs. And if she doesn't, then we'll figure it out together. But I'm not turning her over to some government office where she'll end up in a cage or worse. Ray removed his hand from his holster. He took off his hat, ran his fingers through his thinning hair, put it back on. I'll give you until Friday, he said. That's 4 days, but you need to call Ellen Hayes. Get the wolf checked out. Rabies, distemper, whatever else she might be carrying. If there's any sign of disease, any aggression, there won't be. If there is, Ray continued, I'll have to do my job. Are we clear? Clear as creek water. Ray nodded. He looked at Ghost one more time, a long look. Something unreadable in his eyes, then turned and walked out the door. Maggie watched his cruiser back down the driveway and disappear around the bend. Her hands were trembling. 4 days. Lord, let that be enough. Dr. Ellen Hayes arrived at 2 o'clock, right on time. She drove a mud-spattered Jeep Cherokee with a dented fender and a bumper sticker that said, I'd rather be fishing. She was 48 years old, built sturdy like farm women get, with gray-streaked brown hair pulled back in a messy ponytail and hands that looked like they'd pulled 1,000 calves into the world. Heard you've got yourself a situation. She set her medical bag on the kitchen table and snapped on a pair of latex gloves. Let's see what we're dealing with. Ghost allowed the examination. Barely. She growled when Ellen checked her teeth, a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. Snapped when Ellen pressed on her belly, jaws closing on empty air inches from the vet's fingers. Maggie held her the whole time, hands buried in the white fur, murmuring the same nonsense words she'd used with scared children back at the school. Easy. Girl. That's it. Almost done now. Good girl. Ellen sat back on her heels, stripped off the gloves with 2 sharp snaps. Well, she's underweight, but not critical. She's been eating. Maggie nodded. Good. Keep it up. There's minor frostbite on her paw pads. They'll heal on their own if she stays warm and dry. Teeth are healthy. No sign of rabies or distemper. Ellen paused. Her eyes dropped to Ghost's belly, to the swollen teats visible beneath the thin fur. She's been nursing recently. Mammary glands are still enlarged. She looked up at Maggie. She had pups, 3 or 4 of them, I'd guess, based on the development. Maggie's chest tightened. I knew it. They'd be 3, 4 months old by now. Old enough to survive a few days on their own. If they found shelter. Ellen stood, knees cracking like green wood in a fire. Wolves are smart. The pups would have stayed together, found somewhere to hole up an old den, a hollow log, maybe an abandoned beaver lodge. And if they didn't, Ellen's face was kind but honest. She wasn't the type to sugarcoat. Then nature took its course. It happens, Maggie. It's hard, but it happens. Maggie looked at Ghost. The wolf was staring at the door again. That same fixed, unblinking stare she'd had since the first night. She knows where they are, Maggie said quietly. Ellen raised an eyebrow. What makes you say that? I don't know how to explain it. Maggie shook her head. I can just feel it. She knows. She's just not strong enough to get to them yet. Ellen studied her for a long moment. Something flickered in her expression. Skepticism, maybe, or curiosity, or maybe just the recognition of one stubborn woman looking at another. Call me if anything changes. She picked up her bag. And Maggie, be careful. She might seem gentle right now, but she's still wild. That won't ever change, no matter how many nights she sleeps by your fire. The door closed behind her. The cabin fell quiet. Maggie sat down on the floor beside Ghost. Her hand found the wolf's head, scratching behind the ears the way Ghost seemed to like. We'll find them, she whispered. I don't know how yet, but I made you a promise, and I intend to keep it. The telephone rang at 7 o'clock. Maggie was half asleep in Walter's chair. She'd started sitting in it now, without thinking twice when the shrill sound jolted her awake. She crossed to the kitchen on stiff legs, picked up the receiver. Hello? Mom, it's David. Her son's voice, tinny and distant through the old phone line. Traffic sounds in the background, honking horns, the rumble of trucks, Chicago noise. David. She wrapped the phone cord around her finger, an old habit. This is a surprise. Frank called me. A pause. The traffic sounds faded, like he'd stepped inside somewhere. He said you've got a wolf living in your house. Maggie closed her eyes. Frank Dawson. I'm going to wring your neck. Frank needs to learn to mind his own business. Are you okay? Do you need me to come up there? There it was. The question she'd been waiting 3 years to hear. But the way he asked it distracted, rushed, like she was another problem on his list between conference calls made her jaw tighten. I'm fine. The wolf is fine. Everything's fine. Mom, it's getting late. David, I should turn in. I'm worried about you. Well, Maggie kept her voice even. That's a first. Silence on the line. She could hear him breathing. Could picture the furrow between his eyebrows, the way he chewed his bottom lip when he didn't know what to say, just like his father used to do. That's not fair, he said quietly. No. Maggie's throat felt tight. Reckon it's not. Neither of them spoke. Good night, David. She hung up before he could answer. Ghost was watching her from across the room. Those yellow eyes caught the lamplight, glowing like twin moons. Your family probably doesn't give you this kind of grief, Maggie said. Ghost's tail swished against the quilts. Then she stood, walked to the door, pressed her nose against the crack at the bottom, and howled. The sound started low, down in her chest, then rose higher, louder, filling the cabin and spilling out into the night, wild and mournful and ancient, the cry of every wolf that had ever called across frozen wilderness for the ones they loved. Maggie stood frozen by the telephone, the receiver still warm in her hand. The howl faded, died away into silence. Ghost turned to look at her. They answered. I heard them. They're out there. Maggie's heart was pounding against her ribs. Tomorrow, she whispered. Tomorrow, we'll find them. But as she lay in bed that night, listening to Ghost pace restlessly by the door, pawing at the wood, whining softly into the darkness, a cold thought crept in. What if I'm wrong? What if they're not out there at all? What if I promised her something I can't deliver outside? The wind picked up. Snow began to fall. And somewhere in the vast Minnesota wilderness, something howled back. Day 4. 4:47 a.m. Maggie woke to the sound of claws on wood. She pushed herself up from the couch she'd given up on the bedroom. Too cold back there, too far from the fire and from Ghost, and squinted into the darkness. Ghost was pacing. Door, window, door again, back to the window. Her claws clicked against the floorboards in a frantic rhythm that set Maggie's teeth on edge. Her breath came in short, sharp huffs, fogging in the cold air that seeped through the old walls. What is it, girl? Maggie swung her legs off the couch. Her knee popped. Her back seized. She ignored both and pushed herself upright. What's got you so worked up? Ghost stopped at the door, turned to look at Maggie. Those yellow eyes caught the dying glow of the fire, bright as lanterns in the dark. Then she scratched at the door, hard. Wood curled under her claws, leaving pale gouges in the dark pine. Hey, now, stop that! Maggie crossed the room, feet cold on the bare floor. You'll tear the whole thing, Ghost whined, high-pitched, urgent. She pressed her nose against the crack beneath the door, sniffing so hard her whole body trembled with the effort. Something had changed. Maggie could see it in the wolf's muscles, the tension coiled tight as a spring, the way her ears swiveled toward sounds too faint for human ears. Ghost wasn't just restless like she'd been the past 2 nights. She wasn't just anxious or stir-crazy. She was certain. You know where they are, Maggie's voice came out barely above a whisper. Don't you, girl. Ghost's tail wagged, once, twice. She scratched at the door again, then turned and looked at Maggie with an expression that was almost pleading. Now. We have to go now. Maggie stood in the dark cabin, 62 years old, bad knee, bad back. No business going anywhere except back to the couch, outside. The temperature was somewhere below 0. The snow was knee-deep in the open and deeper in the drifts. The nearest house was Frank's place, 4 miles down a road that might not be plowed yet. This is foolish. This is the most foolish thing you've ever considered doing. Ghost whined again. The sound cut through Maggie's chest like a blade. She reached for her boots. The cold hit her like a fist. She'd layered everything she could find: thermal underwear that smelled of mothballs, 2 wool sweaters, Walter's canvas hunting jacket, the insulated gloves she'd bought at the Fleet Farm in Virginia 3 winters back. The flashlight was heavy in her hand, batteries fresh, beam cutting a pale circle in the darkness. Ghost stood on the porch, trembling with impatience. The moment Maggie stepped outside and closed the door behind her, the wolf bolted down the steps and into the snow. Wait, but Ghost didn't go far. 20 feet from the porch, she stopped, turned, looked back at Maggie. Follow me, please. Maggie pulled her scarf up over her nose and stepped off the porch into the snow. The forest swallowed them whole. Pine trees rose on either side like the walls of a cathedral, their branches heavy with snow, blocking out what little starlight filtered through the clouds. Maggie's flashlight beam seemed thin and weak against all that darkness a single match struck in a vast, cold room. Her boots broke through the frozen crust with every step, sinking to mid-calf, sometimes deeper. Her thighs burned. Her lungs ached from the cold air, each breath like swallowing needles. Ghost moved ahead, a white shape against white snow, visible only by the shadow she cast in the flashlight beam. She didn't run, didn't bound ahead and leave Maggie behind, just walked with purpose, nose to the ground, following a trail only she could sense. Half a mile in, maybe more. Maggie had lost track. Her knee screamed with every step, a hot poker driven through the joint. Her back had seized up tight as a rusted hinge. Sweat soaked her undershirt beneath all those layers, freezing against her skin every time she stopped moving. This is crazy. This is absolutely crazy. You're going to collapse out here and nobody will find you until spring. But she kept walking, one foot in front of the other. The way Walter used to say, that's how you get through anything, one foot at a time. Ghost stopped at a fallen tree, half buried in snow, sniffed the bark, moved on. Maggie's flashlight caught something in the snow ahead. She paused, chest heaving, and aimed the beam downward. Tracks, small paw prints, pressed into the frozen crust, multiple sets, overlapping each other, all heading the same direction Ghost was leading her. Good girl. Maggie's voice came out as a wheeze, thin and reedy in the cold. Keep going. We're getting close. The beaver lodge appeared without warning. One moment there was nothing but trees and snow and darkness. The next, the forest opened onto the edge of a frozen pond, and there it was, a mound of sticks and frozen mud rising from the ice like a small, lumpy hill. Old, abandoned. Half the structure had collapsed inward, leaving a dark opening in the side, maybe 2 feet across. Ghost stopped at the edge of the pond. Her whole body went rigid, every muscle tense, ears pricked forward. Then she made a sound Maggie had never heard before. Not a howl, not a whine. Something in between a soft, warbling cry that rose and fell like a question, like a mother calling to children who might not answer. Silence. Maggie held her breath. The cold burned her lungs. Movement inside the lodge. A small face appeared in the dark opening. Gray fur. Darker than Ghost's white coat. Pointed ears, too big for the head. Eyes reflecting the flashlight beam like tiny mirrors. Gold and wild and terrified. Then another face, and another. 3 wolf pups, huddled together in the entrance of the collapsed beaver lodge, staring out at the world that had taken their mother away. They didn't run to Ghost. Maggie had expected them to bolt across the ice the moment they saw her, to throw themselves at their mother in a frenzy of relief. But they didn't move, just stood there in the entrance to the lodge, shaking, pressed against each other for warmth. Then the largest one, a male. Maggie thought, with darker markings around his muzzle, stepped forward. His nose twitched. He was smelling the air, smelling Maggie. He came toward her first, not Ghost, her. Maggie stood frozen, flashlight beam trembling, and the pup circled her boots, sniffing, sniffed the hem of her coat, where Ghost's scent must have lingered, sniffed her gloves, her knees, the cuffs of her pants. Then he pressed his wet nose against her palm. She held still, barely breathing. The pup licked her hand. His tongue was warm and rough against her cold skin. The other 2 pups followed their brother's lead. They surrounded Maggie, sniffing, investigating, their small bodies pressing against her legs. Their fur was damp and dirty, matted with mud from the lodge. They were thin, too thin, but alive. They're checking me, making sure I'm safe, making sure I'm not a threat. Only after they'd finished their inspection did they turn to Ghost, and then the dam broke. Ghost made that sound again, the warbling cry, and the pups rushed to her. They tumbled over each other in their hurry, yipping and whining, tails wagging so hard their whole bodies shook. They pushed their noses into her fur, climbed over her back, nipped at her ears. Ghost dropped to the ground, and the pups piled on top of her. They found her belly, searching for the comfort they remembered, and began to nurse even though they were almost too old for it. Their small mouths worked desperately, seeking not food, but safety. Connection. The assurance that their mother was real, was here, was never leaving again. Maggie found a snow-covered log at the edge of the clearing, sat down heavily, legs shaking too badly to hold her up. She watched the reunion in the gray pre-dawn light. Ghost's eyes were closed now. Her body was relaxed for the first time since Maggie had found her on that frozen road. The pups squirmed and whimpered against her belly, making small sounds of contentment. Maggie's cheeks were wet. She wasn't sure when she'd started crying. Didn't try to stop, just sat there in the cold, tears freezing on her face, watching a family come back together. "You found them," she whispered. "They're okay. They're all okay." Ghost opened her eyes, looked at Maggie over the pile of pups at her belly. Something passed between them. Not words, there were no words for this, just understanding, gratitude, a debt that could never be repaid. "Thank you. Thank you for bringing me back to them." "You're welcome," Maggie said. Her voice cracked. "Now let's get you all home before we freeze to death out here." The walk back took twice as long. Ghost led the way, moving slowly so the pups could keep up. They stumbled through the snow on legs too short for the deep drifts, falling and scrambling up and falling again. The smallest one, a female with a white blaze on her chest, just like her mother, kept looking back at Maggie, as if checking that she was still there. By the time the cabin came into view through the trees, the sun was cresting the horizon. Golden light spilled across the snow, turning everything to fire and amber. Maggie pushed open the front door. Warm air rushed out to meet them, carrying the smell of wood smoke and the faint ghost of coffee. Ghost walked inside like she owned the place. The pups hesitated on the threshold, noses twitching at the unfamiliar smell's fire, human, the strange indoors. Then the little female bounded through the doorway, and her brothers followed. They found the quilts by the wood stove and collapsed in a heap of gray and white fur, burrowing against each other and against Ghost. Within minutes, they were asleep. Maggie stood in the doorway, watching. Her whole body ached in ways she couldn't even name. Her knee had gone from screaming to a dull, worrying numbness. Her back felt like someone had taken a hammer to it. But she was smiling. A real smile, the kind that used all the muscles in her face. She crossed to the living room, sank into Walter's chair without thinking about it. The worn leather creaked under her weight, and the cushion, molded to his shape after 30 years, seemed to welcome her. First time in 3 years. She hadn't sat in this chair since the night he died. Couldn't bear to. It was his chair. His spot, the place where he'd read his newspapers and drunk his coffee and fallen asleep during Vikings games. Now she was sitting in it, watching a wolf and her pups sleep by the fire. And it didn't hurt. It felt right. She pulled the old Afghan off the back of the chair, the one her mother had crocheted in 1968, and wrapped it around her shoulders. Let her eyes close, just for a minute, just a short rest. She woke to the sound of tires on gravel. The light had changed, brighter now, slanting through the windows at a sharper angle. Mid-morning, at least. Maggie pushed herself up, blinking. The fire had burned low again. Ghost was awake, head raised, ears pricked toward the window, a car in the driveway. Not Frank's green pickup, not the sheriff's brown SUV, a silver sedan, sleek and foreign-looking, Illinois plates. Maggie's heart stuttered. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. Tall, dark-haired, wearing a city coat that wasn't anywhere close to warm enough for Minnesota in December. David. He stood in the driveway, staring at the cabin like he'd never seen it before. His face was pale, exhausted. He looked like he'd been driving all night, because he'd driven all night, 10 hours from Chicago, through snow and darkness and God knows what else, to get here. He came. He actually came. Ghost's growl started low. The pups stirred, pressing closer to their mother. David walked toward the porch, and Maggie realized, with a sinking feeling in her stomach, that this was going to be a different kind of reunion entirely. Maggie opened the door before David could knock. He stood on the porch, breath fogging in the cold air. His city coat hung open over a wrinkled dress shirt. No hat, no gloves. His ears were red with cold, his nose running. He looked like he'd stepped out of a heated office and driven straight into winter without stopping to think about what he'd need. Mom. David. He looked past her into the cabin. His eyes found the wolves. His face went white as the snow behind him. Good Lord. He took a step back, nearly stumbling off the porch. That's not... Mom, that's not one wolf. That's 4 wolves. In your living room. It's a family. Maggie stepped aside. Come in before you catch your death. David didn't move. He was staring at Ghost, who had risen to her feet, positioning herself between the pups and the doorway. The fur along her spine stood up in a ridge. Her growl was low, barely audible, but steady. Mom? David's voice cracked. What is this? What have you done? I helped an animal that needed helping. Now get inside, you po. You're letting all the heat out. He stepped through the door like a man walking into a house he expected to collapse around him. His eyes never left Ghost. The pups were awake now, huddled behind their mother, watching the stranger with wide, frightened eyes. This is crazy. David ran both hands through his hair. It was longer than Maggie remembered, unkempt, like he'd stopped caring about haircuts somewhere along the way. Have you lost your mind? You've got wild animals in your house. Wolves, Mom, predators. They haven't bothered me yet. That's not funny. I'm not trying to be funny. Maggie closed the door. The cabin felt smaller with David in it, smaller and more crowded, though he was just one person. She was dying when I found her, frozen half to death on County Road 16. Her pups were lost in the forest. What was I supposed to do? Drive on by... Yes. David jabbed a finger toward Ghost. That's exactly what you were supposed to do. Call animal control. Call the sheriff. Call anyone. I called the sheriff. He knows. And he's okay with this. He gave me until Friday to sort things out. Friday. David laughed. A short, sharp sound with no humor in it. That's 3 days from now. And what happens then, when these wolves are healthy and strong and decide you look like dinner? Ghost's growl deepened. She took a step forward, placing herself more firmly between David and the pups. David took a step back, his shoulder blades hitting the door. See? His voice rose. You see that she's about to attack me. She's not going to attack you. Maggie kept her voice level. You're hollering and waving your arms around. You're scaring her pups. Course she's on edge. I'm scaring them. Lower your voice. Don't tell me to... David stopped, closed his eyes, took a breath. When he opened them again, some of the panic had faded, replaced by something harder, something Maggie recognized, his father's stubbornness, turned inward and gone cold. I drove 10 hours. His voice was quieter now, but no less sharp. Frank called me yesterday. Said you were in trouble. Said you'd lost your marbles. Bringing a wolf into the house, and someone needed to come up here and talk sense into you. Frank should mind his own business. He's worried about you. We're all worried about you. Maggie crossed her arms. Who's we? David? You haven't called in 3 months. Last time I saw Emma was 2 years ago. 2 years. She probably doesn't even know what my voice sounds like anymore. David's jaw tightened. She knows. Does she? When's the last time you showed her a picture of me? When's the last time you talked about her grandmother up in Minnesota, living all alone? I've been busy. Work is work. Maggie heard the bitterness in her own voice and didn't try to hide it. Same excuse your father used for 20 years. Same thing I heard every time he missed a school play, a birthday, a Christmas Eve service. Work is busy. Maggie, you understand. Don't you, Maggie? This isn't about Dad. It's always about your father. Maggie's hands were shaking now. She pressed them against her thighs to still them. You're just like him. Same way of burying yourself in something so you don't have to feel anything. Same way of running from anything that hurts. That's not fair. Well, neither is being forgotten. The words hung in the air between them. Ghost had stopped growling. The pups had gone quiet. Even the fire seemed to have died down. The crackling faded to whispers. David stood with his back against the door, face pale, a muscle jumping in his jaw. His eyes were wet. He blinked rapidly, looking away. I came to his funeral. You stayed 3 days. Maggie's throat felt tight, but she kept talking. 3 days. David. Then you flew back to Chicago and I didn't hear from you for 2 months. 2 months. I buried my husband. Your father and my only son couldn't even pick up the telephone. I didn't know what to say. You could have said anything. You could have said nothing at all. You could have just been here. I couldn't. David's voice broke. He pressed the heel of his hand against his eyes. I couldn't come back here. Mom, don't you understand this place? Shade. Dad is everywhere. His smell is in the walls. His voice is in every creak of these floorboards. I walk through that door and I can see him sitting in his chair, reading his paper, asking me if I caught the game last night. He stopped. His eyes found Walter's chair, the chair Maggie had been sitting in. You're in his chair? First time in 3 years. Why now? Maggie looked at Ghost. The wolf had settled, lying down with the pups pressed against her sides. Her yellow eyes moved between Maggie and David, watching, waiting. Because I stopped being afraid. Maggie's voice was steady now, calm. Because something came into my life that needed me, and taking care of her reminded me that I'm still here, still alive, still good for something. David followed her gaze, looked at the wolves for a long moment. Mom, you left because it hurt too much. Maggie softened her voice. No point in attacking him anymore. They were past that now, into the raw wound beneath. I understand. David, I do. But I stayed. I stayed because leaving felt like giving up on him. On this place on Teestashe. On everything we built together. And some days, she had to stop. Clear her throat. Some days, staying felt like drowning. Like slipping under the water an inch at a time, so slow nobody notices until you're gone. David's face crumpled. Why didn't you tell me? Would it have made any difference? He opened his mouth, closed it. No answer. Because they both knew the truth. Ghost rose from the floor, walked across the room, past the pups, past David, to the door. She stood there, looking back at Maggie with those golden eyes. He needs time, so do you. I need some air. David's voice was rough, scraped raw. He fumbled for the door handle behind him. I need to think. David. But he was already outside. The door closed behind him. Cold air swirled through the cabin, carrying the smell of snow and exhaust. Through the window. Maggie watched him get into the rental car. He didn't start the engine, just sat there, head bowed over the steering wheel, shoulders shaking. She sank into Walter's chair. Her hands trembled. Her chest ached like something had cracked open inside it. Ghost padded back across the room, lay down at Maggie's feet. The pups followed, piling against their mother, seeking warmth. "He'll be back." Maggie's voice was hoarse. "He just needs time." Ghost's ear flicked toward her, outside. David was still sitting in the car, still not moving. And Maggie found herself wondering, for the first time in 3 years, whether some things could be fixed at all or whether she and her son had waited too long. Let too much silence pile up between them until the distance was too far to cross. "Lord, I don't know how to reach him. I don't know if I can, but if there's any way to bring my boy back to me, please, Vesso. Show me the way." To be continued, Hardane. The cabin felt different with David gone. Not empty, the wolves were still here. Ghost at her feet, the pups dozing in a heap by the dying fire. But the air held something heavy now. Words spoken that couldn't be taken back. Wounds torn open and left bleeding. Maggie sat in Walter's chair, staring at nothing. The afternoon light slanted through the windows, pale and thin. Dust motes drifted in the still air. Outside, David's rental car sat silent in the driveway. He'd driven off an hour ago, tires spinning on the icy gravel. She didn't know where he'd gone, didn't know if he was coming back. Lord, what a mess. What a terrible, foolish mess. She pushed herself up from the chair. Her knee protested. Her back joined in. She ignored them both and walked across the room, needing to move, needing to do something besides sit and stew in her own regret. Her feet carried her to Walter's desk. It sat in the corner by the window, the same spot it had occupied for 40 years. Oak, solid and heavy. Built by Walter's father back in 1958 when he'd finished the cabin. The wood was scarred with decades of use. Coffee rings, pen marks, a gouge near the front edge where Walter had slipped with his pocket knife while carving Emma's initials the summer she turned 5. Maggie hadn't opened these drawers in 3 years. Hadn't been able to face what was inside. Walter's things, Walter's life, all the small pieces of a man reduced to objects in a wooden box. Her hand found the brass pull on the top drawer, cool metal against her palm. She pulled. Papers. Old bills from the power company. Paid and filed. A broken wristwatch with a cracked face. Walter had meant to fix it for years. Never got around to it. His reading glasses, one lens missing, the frames bent from the time he sat on them by accident. A checkbook register from 2019 numbers written in his cramped, slanting hand. The smell hit her first. Dust and old paper and something else underneath Walter's scent. Faint but unmistakable. Old spice and pipe tobacco and the particular smell of his skin. Maggie's throat tightened. She kept digging. Near the back of the drawer, behind the checkbook register, her fingers found something smooth. An envelope. White, standard size, sealed. She pulled it out, her name on the front. Maggie. Walter's handwriting. The letters cramped and leaning left like they were trying to escape off the edge of the paper. Underneath her name, in smaller letters, "When you're ready." Maggie's hands began to shake. She carried the envelope back to the chair, sat down heavily. Ghost lifted her head, watching, then settled again. The paper was crisp under Maggie's fingers. The seal held firm. He'd pressed it down tight, the way he did everything. Thorough, careful. She slid her thumb under the flap, tore it open. Inside, a single sheet of paper, folded in thirds. She unfolded it, and Walter's voice rose up from the page, so clear she could almost hear him speaking. "Maggie, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry for not telling you sooner. The doctor gave me some numbers back in September that I didn't care for. Said my heart was wearing out. Said I had maybe a year, maybe less. depending on how careful I was. You know me. Careful isn't in my nature. I didn't tell you because I knew what you'd do. You'd have made me stop chopping wood, stop clearing snow, stop going out on the lake. You'd have wrapped me in cotton wool and watched me every minute, waiting for the end. That's no way to live, Maggie. I'd rather have 6 months of really living than 2 years of being wrapped up like a china cup. Maggie's vision blurred. She blinked, and tears dropped onto the paper, darkening the ink. She kept reading. I know you better than you know yourself. Always have. You're going to close up when I'm gone. You're going to push people away and tell yourself you're fine when you're not. You did the same thing after your mother passed. Remember, took me 2 years to coax you back into the world. Don't do that this time. Please. Find something to take care of. A dog, maybe. Or a garden, something that needs you. You were always best when you had someone depending on you. That's who you are, Maggie. It's your gift. Don't let that part of you go dark just because I'm not there anymore. Ghost rose from the floor, walked across the room, claws clicking softly on the wood. She stopped beside the chair and lay down at Maggie's feet, pressing her warm body against Maggie's legs. The pups followed, tumbling over each other, piling against their mother nature. Maggie reached down without thinking. Her hand found Ghost's head. The soft fur, the warmth of her. She kept reading. David is going to disappoint you. I'm sorry for that. I love that boy more than my own life, but he's got my worst qualities. He doesn't know what to do when things get hard, so he runs. He buries himself in work and tells himself he's being responsible when, really, he's just scared. Don't give up on him. He loves you, Maggie. He just doesn't know how to show it. Keep calling, even when he doesn't call back. Keep reaching out, even when he pulls away. Be stubborn about it. Lord knows you're good at stubborn. I wish I could be there to see Emma grow up. I wish I could hold your hand one more time, the way I did that first night at the church dance in 1979. You remember that you were wearing that blue dress with the white collar, and I thought you were the prettiest girl I'd ever seen. Still think so. I wish I had more years to give you. I wish I had forever. But I don't. So I'm giving you this instead. Don't let the quiet win, Maggie. Fill that cabin with something music. Voices. The sound of somebody else breathing. Anything but silence. I love you. I'll love you even when I'm not there to say it. Yours always, Walter P.S. If you sell the cabin, I will haunt you. That's a promise. Maggie read the letter twice, 3 times. Then she pressed it against her chest and let the tears come. Not the quiet, controlled tears she'd allowed herself at the funeral, when everyone was watching. These were deep, wrenching sobs that tore out of her body without permission. Her shoulders shook. Her breath came in ragged gasps. 3 years of grief, dammed up and held back, finally breaking free. Ghost whined softly. Her nose found Maggie's hand cold and wet against her skin. He knew. Maggie's voice came out raw, barely recognizable. He knew me better than I knew myself. Always did. She looked down at Ghost. The wolf looked back, those golden eyes calm and patient. He asked me to find something to take care of. A laugh escaped her, wet and broken. And then you showed up on that road, half frozen, needing help. What are the odds of that? Ghost's tail moved, once. Twice. Thank you, Maggie whispered, for finding me when you did. The crunch of tires on gravel. Maggie wiped her face with the back of her hand. Through the window, she saw David's rental car pulling back into the driveway. The engine cut. The door opened. David walked toward the cabin. His shoulders were hunched, his face drawn. He'd been gone for 3 hours. She could see snow in his hair, on the shoulders of his inadequate coat. He'd walked somewhere, in this cold, without proper clothes. The door opened. He stood on the threshold, not coming in. I went to Frank's place. His voice was rough, scraped raw. We talked. For a long time. Maggie waited. The letter was still clutched against her chest. He told me things. David's eyes were red. About the last 3 years. The real story. Not what you told me on the phone. What did he say? David swallowed hard. He said there were weeks you didn't leave this cabin. Said he had to bring you groceries because you wouldn't drive to town. Said he found you once just sitting in the dark. No fire, no lights, like you'd forgotten the world existed. Maggie said nothing. It was all true. He said he was scared. David's voice cracked. Scared he'd come by one morning and find you. That you'd just... He couldn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Why didn't you tell me, Mom? His eyes found hers wet, desperate, lost. Why didn't you tell me it was that bad? Maggie looked at her son, 38 years old, her baby, grown into a man who looked so much like his father it made her heart ache. Would it have made any difference? David, would you have come? The question hung between them, heavy, unanswered. David's eyes dropped to the paper pressed against her chest, the white envelope in her lap. What's that? Maggie looked down at Walter's handwriting, his voice, reaching across 3 years of silence. Your father left me something. She held out the letter. I think it's time you read it too. To be continued, Part 9. David read the letter twice. He sat on the floor with his back against the wall, the paper trembling in his hands. The firelight flickered across his face, catching the wet tracks on his cheeks. His lips moved, tracing his father's words without sound. When he finished, he didn't look up, just sat there, staring at the familiar handwriting. Ghost lay between them. The pups sprawled against her belly. The curious male, the one who'd been the first to approach Maggie at the beaver lodge, lifted his head and watched David with round, amber eyes. He knew. David's voice was barely above a whisper. He knew his heart was giving out, and he didn't say a word to anyone. That was your father. Maggie's hands rested in her lap, empty now, the ache in her chest slowly easing. Never wanted to be a burden. Never wanted anyone fussing over him. I would have come home. David looked up. His eyes were red, his face blotchy. If I'd known, Mom, I would have been here. I know you would have. I wasted so much time. Maggie said nothing. There was nothing to say. The time was gone. It couldn't be brought back. All they had was what lay ahead. The curious pup stood, stretched, his small body forming a perfect arc. Then he wobbled across the floor toward David, nose twitching. David went still. Don't move, Maggie said softly. Let him figure you out. The pup circled David's outstretched legs, sniffed his city shoes, leaving a smudge of wet on the polished leather, sniffed the cuff of his pants, the sleeve of his coat. Then he pressed his cold nose against David's palm. David flinched. The pup didn't retreat, just stood there, waiting, tail swishing, slowly, carefully. David turned his hand over. The pup licked his fingers quick, rough strokes of his warm tongue. Dad used to say you could judge a man's character by how animals took to him. David's voice was thick. Said it was the one test that couldn't be cheated. He was right about most things. David looked at Ghost. She was watching him, those yellow eyes steady, measuring, not threatening, just deciding. She's not afraid of me. She's figuring out whether you're worth trusting. Maggie leaned forward in Walter's chair. Give her time. She's been through a lot. So have you. They talked until the fire burned low and the windows turned black with night. Not about the wolves. Not about the letter. About everything else, the small things. The daily things. The ordinary moments that had slipped past unshared for 3 years. David told her about his job, The long hours, the constant pressure, the way he worked until midnight most nights just to avoid going home to his empty apartment. He'd separated from his wife, Jennifer, 6 months ago. Hadn't told Maggie, hadn't told anyone. Maggie told him about the cabin, the winters that got harder every year, the mornings she couldn't find a reason to get out of the bed, the day she'd looked in the mirror and hadn't recognized the woman staring back. The fire crackled and popped. Ghost's pups slept in a pile, twitching through puppy dreams. I should have been here. David's voice cracked. I should have come, and I didn't, and I don't know how to make that right. You can't fix the past. Maggie reached across the space between them. Her hand found his cold, rough. Her son's hand, so much bigger than she remembered. But you're here now. That's what matters. Is it enough? Maggie squeezed his fingers. It's a start. Morning came soft and gray. Maggie woke in Walter's chair. An afghan draped over her that she didn't remember pulling on. David was asleep on the couch, still in his city clothes, one arm hanging over the edge. Ghost was standing at the door. The pups were awake too, clustered behind their mother, watching her with expectant eyes. Ghost's body was tense, alert, her nose pressed against the crack beneath the door. Maggie rose, her knee complained, her back protested. She ignored them both. Time to go. Ghost's tail swished, once. Maggie crossed the room. Her hand rested on the door handle. She'd known this moment would come, had known from the first night that Ghost wasn't hers to keep. Wild things didn't belong in cabins. They belonged to the forest, the snow, the vast open spaces where humans were visitors, not residents. Knowing didn't make it easier. She opened the door. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of pine and snow. The sun was just cresting the tree line, painting the world in shades of pink and gold. The forest waited, dark and deep, full of sounds only Ghost could hear. Ghost stepped onto the porch. The pups tumbled after her, yipping with excitement. At the edge of the steps, Ghost stopped. Turned. Those golden eyes found Maggie's face. Held there. Thank you. For everything. Go on, girl. Maggie's voice was steady. Barely. They're waiting for you out there. Ghost held her gaze for one long moment. Then she turned and led her pups across the snow. Maggie watched them go. The white shape and the 3 smaller shapes, moving through the drifts, heading for the tree line. 20 yards, 30. Ghost reached the edge of the forest. The shadows waited to swallow her. She stopped, turned again, and lay down in the snow, right there at the tree line. The pups piled around her, tumbling over each other in the white powder. She wasn't leaving. Maggie's breath caught. Ghost rested her head on her paws. Her golden eyes stayed fixed on the cabin. On Maggie. I'm not going far. I'll be right here. 1 week later, the calendar on the wall had marks on it now. December 18th, December 19th, December 20th. Christmas was in 5 days. Frank had built a feeding platform at the edge of the property, grumbling the whole time about foolish women and their foolish projects. But he'd worked all afternoon in the cold, and when he finished, there was a sturdy wooden shelf where Maggie could leave food without trudging through the deep snow. Don't want those pups going hungry, he'd muttered. Not after all this fuss. Ghost came every morning. She'd appear at the tree line just after dawn, the pups bounding around her, and settle into her spot by the big pine. Sometimes she came close enough to touch. Mostly she just watched. A wild thing that had chosen to stay nearby. David had gone back to Chicago, but he called every day now, twice yesterday. Emma had gotten on the phone, her 8-year-old voice bright with questions. "Grandma, can I really see the wolves when we come? Dad says they're wild, but they won't hurt me. Can I bring them a present?" "What do wolves like?" "They like venison," Maggie had told her. "And they like quiet, and they like knowing you're not going to hurt them." "I would never hurt them. Grandma, I promise." "I know you wouldn't, sweetheart." Christmas morning. Maggie sat at the kitchen table, coffee steaming in the mug Emma had painted years ago, the one with the backwards G. David was in the living room, helping Emma unwrap the wooden wolf he'd carved for her last night. His hands weren't as steady as Walter's had been, and the ears were slightly uneven. But Emma didn't care. She held it up to the window, making it run through the air. "Look, Grandma, it's Ghost." "It sure is, honey." Through the frost-kissed glass, Maggie could see the real Ghost sitting in her usual spot by the tree line. The pups were wrestling in the snow nearby, their yips carrying faintly through the cold morning air. David came to stand beside her. He put his hand on her shoulder, a small gesture, but it meant everything. "Merry Christmas, Mom. Merry Christmas, son." They stood there together, watching the wolves, while Emma's laughter filled the cabin. The chair by the window wasn't empty anymore. The phone rang with familiar voices. The calendar had dates circled in red. And out at the tree line, a white wolf raised her head, golden eyes catching the morning light, keeping watch over the family that had saved her own. "Thank you, Lord," Maggie thought, "for sending me what I needed, right when I needed it most, outside." Ghost's tail swished through the snow, almost like she understood. The end. If you've stayed with me this long, I want to thank you, not just for reading, for listening. Maybe you saw yourself in Maggie somewhere along the way. The quiet mornings, the telephone that doesn't ring, the empty chair across the table that used to belong to somebody you loved. I understand, more than you know. Here's what I want you to take with you. It's not too late. It's never too late to reach out, to mend what's broken, to find something worth caring for again. You're not invisible, you're not finished, and somewhere out there maybe closer than you think someone needs exactly what you have to give. Don't wait for life to find you. Go find it. Disclaimer: this story was inspired by countless tales of human resilience and the healing bond between people and animals, created solely for entertainment purposes. The author does not condone, encourage, or promote any form of violence, harmful behavior, or the keeping of wild animals as pets. Wolves are protected wildlife and should never be approached or domesticated. All characters, names, locations, and events depicted in this narrative are entirely products of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or deceased, or actual events is purely coincidental. The end.